We're in Revelation chapter 12, and what are we dealing with here in chapter 12? You're getting a drone view, right? Drone, up in the sky. Drone view of all of life in this age from God's perspective, right? We see this war that begins in heaven, but it also has its effect, obviously, on earth. And we've been looking at the personages of this battle or this war that are mentioned here in chapter 12. When we talked about the fact that there are so many stories, so many books have been written, so many movies have been produced that really display what is actually taking place here, where there's a wonderful, beautiful kingdom that is suddenly overtaken by the Prince of Darkness, right? And the Prince of Darkness causes the prince, the rightful heir to the kingdom, to be banished from the kingdom, and he has to go into hiding for safekeeping for a while. And the citizens, the true citizens of the kingdom, are persecuted by the dark prince and his forces for a time. The maiden, the fair maiden, she's always hidden away in the chamber, in the upper chamber, in the upper kingdom. You know these stories that you've seen and read and have told to you. Oh, but then everyone awaits the return of the prince, the rightful heir to the kingdom, to restore everything back to the way it was intended to be. Well, that's exactly what we're seeing here, isn't it? Yeah. As I said before, if you're going to look at just the basic themes of the Bible, it would be obviously the prince, the rightful prince, Jesus, the heir of the kingdom. Israel, the bride, right? And then the coming prince to regain his kingdom, to restore paradise back to what it was meant to be. Amen? So that's what we're looking at here in chapter 12. And I think we got as far last time as verse 12. Is that correct? Amen. So we're going to read through verse 12, and then we'll pick it on to this new material. Very important, very applicable to our day and time. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head was a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail threw 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was there a place found for them in heaven any longer. And so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. And the accuser of the brethren who accuses them before God day and night has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has but a short season. Now, as you are probably aware, we are dispensational in our hermeneutical bias, right? Everyone has a hermeneutical bias, so you're in one of two camps, hermeneutically, hermeneutic. No, hermeneutics, you know what that is? That's a process, a system by which you study the scriptures, and you use hermeneutical principles, and you can interpret the scriptures correctly, keeping it in its context, historically, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's two basic biases that everybody will approach hermeneutics with. And what are those two biases? Either you are Reformed or covenant in your theology, embracing covenant theology, or you are dispensational. Okay? Those are the two basic differences. In Reformed theology, when it comes to Israel, what do they believe? in replacement theology, that the church somehow has replaced Israel, and all of the promises that God made to Israel now belong to the church. That's very erroneous. But it is interesting to me, they'll accept all the promises, but they won't take the curses. Well, if you're going to replace Israel, then you got to replace her entirety, right? So you get the good with the and the bad with the, yep, right? What's the other? Biased? Dispensationalism. Now, in dispensationalism, we believe that the promises made to Israel are to literal Israel. We believe that wherever you can interpret the prophetic word in a literal sense, that's what you should do. That when it speaks literally, it means exactly what it says. It says what it means. Dispensational theology also embraces the fact that we believe in a pre-trib, premillennial rapture, right? We believe pre-trib, the rapture is going to occur, the rapture of the church, or the taking away of the Zephaniahs. Zephaniah, protected of the Lord. Zephaniah, treasured of the Lord. Zephaniah, sheltered of the Lord in that day of trouble, in that day of his wrath, in that day of indignation. And we also believe that we have not yet entered into the millennial reign of Christ. Now, in Reformed theology, they believe we're in the millennial reign, that Christ is reigning now. Don't look like it to me. But anyway, just so you know, okay, our bias when we approach the Scriptures and interpret the Scriptures hermeneutically is we're dispensationalists. So we believe that Israel still has a very prominent place in Scripture and in the future. That the promises made to Israel through the prophetic word will come true, 100%. Very important that you understand that that's our bias. Now, covenant theology has been responsible for passive and aggressive what? Anti-Semitism. What denomination of the church, what arm of Christendom had expressed that anti-Semitism more than any other early on because of their embrace of covenant theology? Romanism. Catholicism. Catholicism embraces covenant theology. Catholicism embraces the belief that somehow the church has replaced Israel. That is not true. Martin Luther, the father of the Reformation, was a covenant theologian. What was his attitude towards the Jews? He was very anti-Semitic. Maybe some of you don't know that. He said an unconverted Jew is good for one thing. What was it? The fire, the flames, to be burned at the stake. Many of the church fathers had a very anti-Semitic attitude. There is a Messianic Jewish apologist by the name of Michael Brown who wrote a very good book recording the sad history of the Christian church and its anti-Semitism and persecution of the Jews. It's called Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. I think he wrote it around 1960, 70, somewhere in there. Very interesting read. It's true. It's a part of the church history we would like to hide. Why am I making mention of all of that? Because the very next thing that happens, because at this time, and we as dispensationalists believe in chapter 12, when Satan is cast to the earth because there was a place found for him no longer in heaven, what period of time are we in? It's yet future. What period of time are we in yet in the future? There's only 1,260 days left. There's only a 3.5-year period left of human history as we know it. So where are we? We're in the middle. We're in the middle of the 70th seven of Daniel. We're right in. This is the beginning of the tribulation. The tribulation of God, the wrath of God upon the world, happens at the last 3.5 years of world history as we know it. Okay, it's that final heptad that Daniel prophesied of. It's that 1,260 days that are yet to come. Now, what happens is the child that the woman birthed, who was the woman? Israel. Who's the child? Okay, is being persecuted, was being sought after to be devoured by the dragon, the serpent, who was Satan, right? But the child was caught up to heaven. So now, who does Satan turn his wrath upon? Because he's been cast to the earth. What does it say? Look what it says here. Rejoice, verse 12. Rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Who's up in the heavens right now? During this time in the text? Who? The church. We are. And we're rejoicing. Why? Because we're the inhabitants of heaven now. The shelter that we're talking about. Isaiah 26, Psalm 27, all of those prophecies concerning being sheltered and protected and guarded, being taken away before the wrath of God is poured upon the world, is fulfilled. The church is in heaven. We are the inhabitants dwelling in the heavens and rejoicing. Why? Because it's all going to be fulfilled now. The consummation of the age, and everything that God promised is going to come to its fruition. Yes. You who dwell in the heavens rejoice, but woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. For the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has but a short time. And I shared that with you, right? Michael and his angels fought against the devil and his angels, and then Michael grabbed Lucifer, and what did he do with him? Body slammed them. You know, you watch those big-time wrestling, boom, they body slam. Well, that's what happened to Satan, but he gets up off the ground, and he gets up with a fury. He gets up with such a rage, like nothing the world has ever seen. His attack against those whom God loves. And what do we read in verse 13? Now, when the dragon saw that he was cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Who's the woman? Listen, we haven't seen anything yet with regard to what the devil is going to do to turn up the satanic, demonic, anti-Semitism in the world. But anti-Semitism is historic, isn't it? Yeah. When did anti-Semitism begin? In the garden? Well, there weren't any Jews in the garden, were there? There weren't any Jews in the world until when? There weren't any. No, Abraham wasn't a Jew. When did the Jews become Jews? When? After the Exodus. They were the Hammurabi. The Egyptians called them the Hammurabi, the word Hebrew, right? The Hebrews. The word Hebrews means that those who transverse, or those who pass over. Interesting. You look at the history of the word Hebrew, Hammurabi. It comes from what the Egyptians called the Jews. That's when the Jews began, Jewry, right? And so the first persecution was where? In Egypt. And then what other people group persecuted the Jews? After the Egyptians. The Assyrians, after the Assyrians. After the Babylonians. The Medes and the Persians, after the Medes and the Persians. The Greeks, after the Greeks. After the Romans. The Germans, after the Germans. The Muslims, after the Muslims. The entire world, and listen to me, the apostate church. Anti-Semitism has a spiritual origin, and the only way anti-Semitism can really, truly be understood is spiritually. The only anti-Semitism that I was aware of in my life is my family. I lived in a Polish-Italian neighborhood. But there was another section of town where there were a lot of Jewish people lived. And I had a lot of Jewish friends that I went to school with. But my family were so prejudiced against Jews. Polish Catholics, Irish Catholics, Italian Catholics, they despised Jews. We couldn't tell you why. What did we call Jews? The Christ killers. They were the Christ killers, right? And my family was never prejudiced against any people group other than Jews. And I could never really understand it. And as I was growing up, and I had many Jewish friends, I mean, I couldn't see it. I couldn't understand it. But anti-Semitism has been around since the time of the Exodus. Have you ever, in your life, the only Jewish person we have here is that you, Jeff? Anybody else have Jewish blood in them? You know what happens to all these Gentiles that go to these Messianic fellowships? The Messianic fellowships, you know what they're comprised of mainly? Wannabes. That's right, wannabes. And because it's not God's intention right now, okay? That's why the Messianic whole movement has really not been successful, because God says, I'm going to create one new people, both Jew and Gentile, right? One new man, right? And so the Messianic movement is comprised of a Jewish rabbi normally. Normally it's a Jewish rabbi, and the whole congregation is wannabe, Gentile wannabes. And you know what happens to these wannabes? You know, and how many times have we seen it? Because, you know, I've been doing this for a while now, and I always emphasize very strongly this reality of the Bible and our Jewish roots. Well, somebody will get really out of balance, and they'll get whacked out, and all of a sudden they think they're Jewish, you know, and they're coming in with a yarmulke, and then, you know, I mean, and they're more Jewish than my rabbi friend, Rabbi Andy. You know, he tells me that. He said, some of these Gentiles, they think they're more Jewish than I am. And all of a sudden they go back and they research, and back in their great, there was Jewish blood. It's crazy. Hey, I'm a happy Gentile and glad of it. But you know what? I love the Jewish people. I love Israel. I love my Jewish Savior. And I like Jewish food. Now, Jeff, have you ever experienced anti-Semitism in your lifetime?
Yes.
Would you?
All of them.
Would you share? Do you mind? I mean, is it?
Well, it begins very much like you said. I grew up in a town called...
Well, come here, Jeff, because the people online can't hear you. Come over here. You don't mind, do you?
No.
Or just stay there. Pastor Ben will give you the mic. I won't.
There's an example. Very, very similar to what you were just saying. I grew up in a town called New City, New York. And two towns went to my high school, Congers and New City. And Congers was comprised mostly of Italians and Irish Catholics. And they called New City Jew City. And certainly the group that was in power, okay, that was feared was well, as a Jewish kid, we called them Congoloids. And, you know, there were guys like Nemo and Tony Curio and all these killer types, you know, that were probably destined for prison. You know, they were 20 years old and still...
Why are you talking about my cousins?
Yeah, your cousins. They were 20 years old and still in 9th grade, you know, and, you know, wore long leather jackets and brought weapons to school. And so that's what it was like growing up. And you just got used to it, you know. Fortunately, I bonded with some good Italian guys, and so I was a little protected from it. So it started there. But I'm going to tell you, throughout my life, I remember a career position I had with, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but one of the largest companies in the country. And I was in a golf tournament with some of the executives. And I used to not look very Jewish. I had long, dark hair and beard, but it was like a kind of a biker kind of beard. People didn't think I was Jewish. And they were speaking openly right in front of me about the Jews and how they're keeping them out of the company, and, you know. And I kind of knew at that point my career had gotten as high as it was going to get. So I sought a new company. Another time I was in a fraternal organization, and there was some memorization involved. And this one fellow, I'm just standing there at this lodge, and he's going on and on about the Jews, okay, blaming them for everything. They're the worst people on earth. And I waited for him to finish. You know, I didn't want to interrupt him. And then when he was done, I explained to him I was Jewish. And it was funny because a person was assigned to you as a mentor for this memorization. And he was assigned to me to teach me this work. And the first day I met him at his house for lunch, you know, he was really embarrassed. And he said, look, Jeff, I just want to clarify this. I don't hate all Jews. It's just the New York Jews that I really hate. And certainly I had to qualify, you know. I happen to be from New York. And then you hear the old, well, you're the exception. Okay? I can tell you that in relationships prior to my marriage, I experienced, in a fit of anger, being called a derogatory term as a Jew, and that usually was a relationship ender. always was a relationship ender.
So
But
all your life you
All
experienced
my life.
anti-Semitism.
I mean,
So
you
what I'm saying is
experience it
true.
every single. There's rarely a day when people who know you're Jewish won't say something that you just
Right.
put aside for ignorance.
Thank you
So,
for that sad testimony.
Yeah.
But it's sad. Give that. You know, when we witness downtown, particularly to the young people, so many of them have grown up here in the South, in the Bible Belt, the buckle of the Bible Belt. They have Christian parents, and they've been attending church most of their life. And the reason why they reject Christianity is hypocrisy, the hypocrisy in the church. Now, they wouldn't be rejecting Christianity if it wasn't for Christians who aren't acting like Christians, right? So you'd have to have these hypocritical Christians in order to reject that brand of Christianity. Stay with me. You have to have a Semite in order to have an anti-Semite, right? A Semite being a Jewish person. But listen, we're all sinners, aren't we? For all have sinned and fall. And so some people groups are more inclined to certain sins. You mentioned the, Italians, right? There's a certain characterization that they have and a certain sin nature or that they manifest, that they go into, organized crime, et cetera, et cetera. Well, for Jews, when a Jew is not a saved man, what inclination do they have? They become greedy and desire to be rich and controlling and power. So you had to have the worst of the Semite in order to have anti-Semitism. Agreed? Like you have to have hypocritical Christians in order for all these young people to reject Christianity because it's hypocritical. Okay? Now, not defending anti-Semitism in any way. That explains a small portion of it. A very small portion of it. Because Jewish people have been gifted by God to be a gift to the world, haven't they? Why are all of these high-tech companies investing in the state of Israel? Why? Because they're geniuses. Because of the innovations and the technology that they advance. I mean, they're brilliant people. As I've told you before, they're less than half of 1% of the population of the world. Half of 1%. Yet they have made tremendous contributions in every area of discipline, in every area of study, without exception. Isn't that true? Yeah, it doesn't matter what you do. What area you look into, there's been a significant contribution made by a number of Jewish personalities. Now, they're very successful people because of that, because of their genius. Well, people get jealous. People get envious. What does the Bible say? Where envy and self-seeking are, there will be every evil thing. Anti-Semitism is an evil that will never be eradicated until Jesus returns. And the worst of anti-Semitism is yet to come. Now, do you know that there are major evangelicals who are anti-Semites? There are Christian denominations that are anti-Semite. Now, you know what they say today? We're not against the Jews. We're just against Israel. We're just against Zionism. We're not anti-Semites, we're anti-Zionists. We're anti-Zionism, anti-Israel, not anti-Jew. Is that possible? No. If you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Jew. If you're anti-Israel, you're anti-Jew. Period. There's no excuse for that, right? And so it exists today. Now, unfortunately, with the dumbing down of the church, because unfortunately most members of the church today have very little biblical working knowledge, very little working knowledge of the scriptures. They'll go to a mega church where they can get comfortable, where they can have their Starbucks, and the pastor will put one verse on the screen, and they launch out, and you never get taught the Word of God. It's true, you don't. And so you really don't have an understanding of the Israelology of the Bible, of the Jewishness of our faith, where you fall in love with the Jewish people and with the land of Israel. And so much of that is being forsaken today in mass because in these mega congregations, in these mega gatherings, they don't want to hear about Israel. They don't want to hear about prophecy. Why? It's very uncomfortable if you're too comfortable here. If you're too comfortable in this world, those kinds of teachings from the scriptures make you very, that makes you very young. That song that That song would make most congregations in the country very uncomfortable, the song that Pastor David ended with this morning. It speaks of what's to come. Now, what we're reading and studying here is the anti-Semitism that is gaining ground today. Let's go to the text again, and then I want to show you something. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. All right, so the woman is going to flee. Israel is going to flee. Where's she fleeing to? The wilderness, right? The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us that she flees to the mountains. Here it says it flees to the wilderness, they're one and the same. But there's a very specific place where most theologians, most dispensational theologians believe that God has prepared for them, and it's where? Petra, the rock city of Petra, which as you go through the Sig, you go through this narrow crevice and the mountains, and it opens up. It's as big as this area of Manhattan. So thousands and thousands of Jews can be preserved there in the land of Jordan. Oh, Jordan is the safest country right now for Jews and Christians in the Arab world. Did you know that? Yeah. King Abdullah has made tremendous reforms in bringing about a peace and an openness, religious freedom for Jews and Christians in Jordan. Interesting enough. But nonetheless, she's going to flee there, but the wings of an eagle are going to preserve her. Who's that? No, it's not the United States. And that's an erroneous interpretation. Now, when you use the principle of hermeneutics and something is mentioned in the Bible for the first time in a figurative sense, it'll maintain that interpretation throughout the scriptures, right? So is there any place else that God had mentioned that Israel would be preserved on the wings of eagles? Look at Exodus chapter 19 for a moment. Exodus 19. They're making their exodus. God is taking them out of Egypt. Now they're at Mount Sinai, Mount of God. Exodus chapter 19, verse 4. You have seen, God is speaking to Israel, you have seen that what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on and brought you to myself. So who's the eagle? God. And throughout the scriptures, whenever the eagle is used in that figurative sense, he's speaking of himself. He's speaking of God. So who's the eagle here? The eagle's wings here? God himself. God himself is preserving Israel. It's not the United States of America. Now, I don't know what happens to us because we're not in the end time scenario. We're a superpower. We're the only superpower truly of the world today, but China's gaining ground. But how is it that we're absent? I don't know all of that. It's a mystery to me as well. But nonetheless, the scriptures do not indicate that we're a player at all in the end times scenario. But go back to the text now. So she's nurtured there in Petra for time, times, and half a time. How long is that? That's 3.5 years. He's just affirming what he already said previously. This is the middle of the tribulation period. The time left of human history is 1,260 days. That's it. But a portion of Israel, a small remnant of Israel, of the Jews, will be in safety there. But now the serpent, the dragon, Satan himself, what does he do? Look what it says. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up its mouth, swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. So there are those who are being preserved there in Jordan, in Petra. They're a small remnant. But the enemy is raising havoc with the Jews. Anti-Semitism has reached the high water mark. How many of the Jews of Jewry today are going to be killed during this time? 2/3. 66%. That's amazing. Wow. And he goes after that remnant in Petra. Now, he goes after them like a flood. The flood is only speaking of not in a literal sense, in a figurative sense. It's his army, it's his forces that are chasing after her. What happened to the Egyptian forces? Like a flood, right? God opened up the Red Sea. They crossed on dry land. As soon as the Egyptian army went in, Pharaoh and his army got drowned in a 2-foot Red Sea. Can you imagine that? No. It was we're in Numbers on Wednesday. The rebellion of Korah and Abiram and Dathan, what happened to them? The earth opened up, swallowed them up, closed up. Now, it appears that God is doing something very supernatural here and allowing the crust of the earth to open up to swallow up this army. But nonetheless, God preserves them. On the wings of an eagle, on God's wings, they are being preserved. But the enemy now, listen, the male child, the Messiah, the prince, was taken away into safety. In the upper kingdom, where the princess is being held in the upper chamber. You know what I'm saying here. Now, verse 17. And the dragon was enraged with the woman. Who's the woman? And he went out to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God, who have the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is the first personage here in this section. We're going to see two more next week. Okay, we saw the woman is Israel, the child was Jesus. We saw the serpent was the devil. We saw Michael, the archangel, and now we see the offspring of the woman that he's going after now. In that last 3.5 year period, who is he raged with? Who is he pouring out all of his anger and his hatred and his murderous heart towards? The Jewish people. The Jewish people. Anti-Semitism, beloved, is on the rise. Where is anti-Semitism on the rise more than any place else in the United States? College campuses. Recently, the president enacted legislation to do what? To withhold any funds to any university in the country that supports any anti-Semitism whatsoever, that condones or allows any anti-Semitism on the college campus. Why? Because it's pervasive. It's pervasive. Do you know that there are nations in the world? Now, every nation on the globe has some degree of anti-Semitism. There are people groups that have never come into contact with a Jew in their entire life and they're anti-Semitic. How do you explain that? Who's behind all of the anti-Semitism of the day? Satan. It's spiritual. It is spiritual. And that's what I want you to understand. Now what is happening, the 10 virgins, 5 wise, 5 foolish, but what were they all doing? Wake up! Wake up. They're all sleeping. Now the 5 foolish, they are very much asleep and dead to what is happening spiritually, what is going on. An example of that deadness would be what the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said to the body of governors recently. What did he tell the governors of every state? Chinese are infiltrating your state government. They're infiltrating your state house. And for too many of you governors, they're infiltrating your office. And they disguise themselves as other organizations, but they buy influence. They offer tremendous amounts of money to buy these politicians and infiltrate themselves into that state government. And Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, good Secretary of State man that he is, he was trying to do everything he could to stop it, to warn them. And to some degree, it'll fall on deaf ears, but there'll be those who heed the warning. Now, we listen, we have been armed with the truth. We have to go out and begin to warn people. We need to be talking about the anti-Semitism that is on the rise worldwide, but particularly in our country. It's going to lead. And anti-Semitism, alt-right, are they alt-right? Are they anti-Semitic? The alt-right, are they anti-Semitic? Rick Wiles, anybody hear of the evangelist Rick Wiles? Down in Florida. I forgot what part of Florida. It's a huge church, huge following. You know this guy I'm talking about? He said the whole Trump impeachment process was started by the Jews. Yeah, evangelical. He's got a huge following. Tex Mars, anybody ever read Tex Mars, any of his books? He was very popular for a while. Anti-Semitic. Tex Mars, you know who he is? Yeah. It's shocking to see the alt-right. The alt-right is anti-Semitic. Oh, how about the extreme left? They're not, are they? How about the Muslim community in the world? Are they? The Jews are being attacked and persecuted from every corner. Alt-right, alt-left, and everybody in between. It's just amazing. They have one friend in the world. One friend in the world. You know who that is? The Zionist Christians. Zionist Christians. I'm going to show you a video clip, and I think it's really important. I don't normally like to do that. It's 28 minutes. I want you to see it. It's very important that you see it. Now, there are a couple mild profanities that are being said, okay? But they'll pass quickly, and hopefully it should not offend anybody. Yet if it does, I'm so sorry. But you need to be informed. And I'm sure you've heard it other places. But it's mild. But you're going to hear McCain's daughter. She's on The View. What's her name? Meghan McCain, talk about her love for the Jewish people, because she's really adopted the Liebermans as her parents and grandparents, and she loves them, they love her. But she was talking about the fact that she's a Zionist. I'm a Zionist, with tears. I'm a Zionist. I am a Christian Zionist. Are you? Yes. Do you know what it means? I believe that the state of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. That the state of Israel should be a Jewish state. That Jerusalem is the holy city. And Jerusalem is God's holy city. And God gave it to the Jews almost 3,000 years ago. That a whole title deed to Israel was given to the Jews by God. When David was told by God to take over the Jebusite city of Jabesh from the Jebusites and make it the capital of Israel. And the place where God would meet with his people. What we're reading here in chapter 12 is yet to come about, but we're seeing it's taking on energy. It's accelerating. And you and I have a responsibility to be informed and to make people aware of what's happening. Too many pastors in the pulpits of America. I love this movement. I got birthed into Calvary Chapel, but the leader of the Calvary Chapel movement on the West Coast at Costa Mesa, California, said, don't teach about Israel, don't teach about end times anymore. He's going in the same direction all of these other megachurches are going. Why? They're more concerned about nickels and noses. They're more concerned about numbers. They're more concerned about that mustard seed growth than they are about telling the truth. Andy Stanley, largest church in Georgia, largest church in Atlanta. Andy Stanley is the pastor of the church, said he never talks about Israel, never talks about prophecy. It's divisive. It is, listen, covenant theology, what is it responsible for? Passive and aggressive anti-Semitism. In all of its forms, passive and aggressive. And now we have the evangelical world moving in that direction. So many of the churches now are embracing Reformed theology. North Greenville College. It was a Baptist school, wasn't it? North Greenville College was dispensational. You know the majority of the instructors now, what do they lose? They're covenant theologians. Who's doing all of this? Who's orchestrating all of this? Where is this conspiracy originated? With the devil, the serpent, the dragon, the devil. Watch this. Oh, let me just say. How many of you get Zola Levitt's newsletter, the Levitt Letter? Good. This month. Here's the title. Rising Christian Anti-Semitism in America. This was in the right-hand lower caption. Go to the next slide. Rick Wiles. Rick Wiles is an evangelical pastor in South Florida. He's got a huge following. His latest broadcasts have been spewing the hate that he has towards the Jewish people, blaming the Jews for the impeachment craziness that's going on. It's insane. But watch this video clip. It goes right to the current time, to the present legislation that our president just passed. The danger is the direction that our nation is headed in, maybe not in the next 4 years, but maybe in the next 10 years. The Nazi party in Germany was called the what? The Nazi Socialist Party. The National Socialist Party. And the whole extreme left of the country now, what do they want to bring into the society? Socialism. And the socialist policies that the Nazi government had established in Germany caused such hardship for the people, but the people needed a scapegoat. Who was their scapegoat? The Jews. What do you think is going to happen here? What's the one thing we learned from history? We don't learn anything from history. History always repeats itself. But again, you know, some of the speakers there were hard-pressed to try to give you an explanation for this hatred of the Jewish people that seems to make no sense whatsoever. And we know the origin. We're reading it. It's satanic. Now, it will end. It will end with the coming of the Prince of the Kingdom. And they will end it for sure. But now we have a responsibility to do everything we can do to share the truth with others in our society. It's amazing how many people really don't have an understanding of the appreciation, the thanksgiving we should have for the people who gave us the book, who gave us Jesus, the Messiah. Yes, Jeff?
I feel it's really important for me to add something. And
Wait a minute,
I'm
Jeff.
not going to ask.
Wait a minute. Because we're recording this and there's people listening online. Jeff has a comment he'd like to make. He feels it's important.
What I'm going to say to this group, you know, I'm not going to ask people to raise their hands, but think about how many of you believe you have been grafted in. What were you grafted into?
Israel.
And you know what? Pastors talked about the casual Christians, those who say they're Christians, but don't believe anything you believe. And if you don't think, if you're going around thinking, I don't have to worry about the Jews because I'm not one of them, guess what? You were grafted in. Jesus was a Jew. All right? And if you don't think that the casual Christians are talking about the evangelicals and you as though you're sick and you're weird and you're dangerous, then think again, because you are as much at threat as the Jew. That's all.
Remember the
I wanted to
history of
say.
Nazi Germany. It was the Jew first, and then who was Hitler going after? The Christians. The Christians. And who are the two people groups in our nation today that have no really civil rights whatsoever? Christians and Jews.
Well, didn't Jesus say they're going to hate me? They're
Sure.
going to hate you.
They hate because of me. Sure. But we have to do what we can to expose that hatred to those who are ignorant, to those who really don't understand the love that you should have for Israel. When you don't teach about the Israelology of the Bible, when you don't teach the prophecies in the Bible, you don't come to any of that understanding. So many of the church, so many of our brothers and sisters out there, they're so unaware. They're so ignorant. You, get out there. You're armed and dangerous now. Amen? Shall we stand?